was the one who called the police on my own daughter, and I did it to save her life. At least, that's what I told myself when the sirens echoed down our quiet street and the red and blue lights washed over the front porch. My hands trembled, my heart thundered, and every part of me wanted to scream as the officers led her away in handcuffs. But this wasn't just a simple mistake or a careless misunderstanding. It was the cruel setup of someone I once trusted more than anyone in the world. Someone who was supposed to protect her. Someone who gave me life. My mother. My name is Marlene Wexler. I am 50 years old, a single mother of one, and a woman who has fought tooth and nail through heartbreak, betrayal, and a bitter divorce. And now, here I was, watching my 15-year-old daughter pay for a crime she never committed. I was born and raised in Lansing, Michigan, in a modest blue-collar family. My father worked in the auto plants, and my mother, Evelyn, stayed home. She was strict, sharp-tongued, and calculating, always demanding perfection, but back then I thought it was love disguised as discipline. I never questioned it, never dared. By the time I was 21, I had married a man who resembled her in all the worst ways, demanding, cold, and dismissive. His name was Robert, and together we had our daughter, Helena. When Robert walked out one winter evening with nothing but a duffel bag and a half-hearted apology, I told myself I could survive without him. What I didn't know was that I'd still have to fight a war inside my own bloodline. The war would come years later, in a way that would shatter everything. Helena was 15 now, tall and graceful, with her father's sharp jawline and my hazel eyes. She was the kind of girl people noticed for her quiet kindness, not her loudness. She volunteered at the local food bank on weekends and brought stray animals home like lost treasures. To me, she was everything. To my mother, however, she was competition. I didn't notice it at first. How Evelyn's remarks about Helena's attitude were less about concern and more about envy. She'd tell her to sit straighter, speak less, and know her place. She'd criticize the way Helena dressed, accusing her of looking too grown. My daughter brushed it off, but I could feel the tension growing. It was like Evelyn couldn't stand to see me raising a daughter who had more freedom and love than I ever did. The night of the incident began like any other family dinner. Evelyn had insisted we come over, claiming she wanted to make peace and start fresh. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to give Helena the chance to know her grandmother without bitterness. So we drove across town to the small two-story home I once grew up in. The moment we stepped inside, though, I felt something was off. The air was heavy, almost staged, like Evelyn had been rehearsing for weeks. She was all smiles, but her eyes darted with a secret I couldn't name. Helena excused herself to the bathroom halfway through dinner, and when she returned, Evelyn's smirk widened like a trap had just been sprung. Minutes later, the police arrived at the door. They claimed Helena had been caught on camera shoplifting from the corner jewelry store earlier that day. My stomach turned cold, my hands shook, and my daughter's wide, tearful eyes pleaded for me to believe her. I did. Every fiber of my being screamed she was innocent. But then the officer reached into Helena's bag and pulled out a gold necklace with the store's tag still attached. Gasps filled the room. Helena's face drained of color. Evelyn covered her mouth, feigning shock so poorly it might as well have been a confession. I knew instantly. My own mother had planted it. She had framed her granddaughter in a cruel, calculated move. And I knew right there that everything was about to spiral into a war far beyond anything I had ever imagined. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut on Helena's wrists haunts me even now. Her voice cracked as she begged them to believe her, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't do it, Mom. Please tell them I didn't do it. The officers glanced at me, waiting for me to react. And in that frozen moment, with Evelyn's satisfied smirk burning into my skin, I did something no mother should ever have to do. I let them take her. My body screamed in rebellion, my heart wanted to tear her free, but my mind, sharp and desperate, knew this was the only way to expose Evelyn's cruelty. If I fought it then, Evelyn would win. She'd twist the truth, bury me in shame, and make Helena look guilty forever. No, I needed to play her game. I needed to let this unfold. Revenge would come, but on my terms. As the squad car pulled away, Evelyn turned to me, her voice dripping with false innocence. "It's such a shame, Marlene. I always worried that girl would follow the wrong path." My teeth clenched so tight I tasted blood. I didn't respond. I didn't dare give her the satisfaction. I simply walked out of that house, my fists balled, my chest burning, and my mind already crafting the steps of a plan so dark and deliberate it frightened me. My mother thought she had broken me, but she had only awakened something far more dangerous. That night, while Helena sat terrified in a holding cell, I sat at my kitchen table with nothing but a notepad and rage. The words poured out: revenge, justice, exposure. If Evelyn wanted a war, she had just signed her own declaration. I couldn't sleep. The image of Helena's trembling hands, the weight of those cold metal cuffs, replayed endlessly in my mind. Every tear she shed became fuel. Every cruel smirk from Evelyn became kindling. By dawn I knew there was no turning back. I would not simply clear my daughter's name. I would destroy Evelyn's carefully built facade of respectability. For decades she had played the role of the strict, noble matriarch in our community. People thought she was a woman of dignity, a pillar of strength. But I knew the truth. I had lived it. And now I had the chance to show the world who she truly was. What she did to Helena was unforgivable, and I would make sure she never forgot the day she crossed the line. But as I sat there, pen in hand, a chilling thought pierced through the rage. What if this was only the beginning? What if Evelyn wasn't just targeting Helena, but me too? What if she wanted to ruin us both, once and for all? My stomach tightened as I realized this wasn't about one necklace, one arrest, or one moment. This was about power. Had always been about power. And for the first time in my life, I decided I would not play the obedient daughter anymore. I would fight back. And when I did, I would fight with everything I had. The storm was coming, and Evelyn had no idea that I had already chosen the battlefield. If you've made it this far, I want to invite you to stay with me. This story is only just beginning, and what happens next will shock you even more. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. I didn't sleep the first night after the arrest. The fluorescent light of the kitchen clock blinked like a metronome as I mapped out steps on the back of an old receipt. Call the lawyer, get Helena's phone records, find camera footage from the store, interview witnesses, and, most dangerously, find proof that Evelyn had planted the necklace. Each item felt like a rung on a ladder leading out of a well. I called my brother Jonah and told him only enough to set him in motion. He arranged childcare for my youngest and agreed to watch our house while I moved. I called a lawyer I trusted, Marta Klein, who used to defend battered women and had a jaw like a judge. Marta did not sugarcoat anything. If you let them process this quietly, it becomes their story, she said. You want the truth to be loud. Her voice steadied me. I felt raw, like a cut that had finally opened, but I also felt something else. An odd, dangerous clarity. I would not let them rewrite our lives. Memories of my mother came back in images, not sentences. Her iron skillet clanging, her pursed lips, the way she'd check the mirror after every conversation to see who watched. As a little girl, I learned early that anger could be dressed up as concern and control could be called care. Evelyn liked people to see only the polished parts. Her charity on Sundays, the pie she brought to church functions, the way she taught knitting to the reluctant old women down the block. But behind that was a machine of critique. She had pried at my confidence like a child taking apart a toy to see all its screws. In high school she'd made me apologize to a teacher she thought I'd offended. In college she'd whispered doubts into my ear until I broke off a scholarship to stay closer. Those small cruelties had a pattern. Now that pattern had become a trap for my daughter. The first visit to the detention center is a blur of antiseptic smells and metal benches. Helena looked at me like someone had split the world in two and left her in the wrong half. Her hands were swollen from the cuffs and she kept apologizing, not to the officers but to me, like she thought I had failed her somehow. I didn't do it, Mom, she said, voice splintered. I swear. I had to swallow the urge to take her into my arms and never let go. Instead I sat across from the glass, pressed my palm to it, and told her the plan I'd already sketched on paper. "We get proof," I said. "We show them what she did. I promise I won't let Evelyn win." Her eyes searched mine for the lie, then held on. She believed me. That faith was sharper than any weapon I had. Marta moved fast. Within 24 hours she'd filed for Helena's temporary release on bond, and demanded the store preserve any footage. She explained legal terms slowly because my mind kept snagging on a single terrible image. Helena in cuffs. "We need a timeline," Marta said. "We need the chain of custody for that necklace, the purchase records for it, and any security footage from the mall and the store." I spent the day calling the jewelry store and being brushed off, then promising to come down myself. Their manager, a man named Russell, said he remembered Helena because she'd once come in with a stray dog and told him jokes to make the clerk laugh. When I mentioned the necklace, a crack of recognition crossed his face. "We had a tag pulled, but it was supposed to be for display," he muttered. That sentence became a match in my mind. I called an old friend who now did private investigation on the side. Tess O'Rourke, a stocky woman with quick hands and a quieter fury than mine. Tess met me at a diner and didn't ask why I was upset. She read the shape of it on my face and slid a business card across the table. "Camera angles tell lies sometimes," she said. "Cameras get turned off. People forget to look. But people talk. I'll find who spoke." Tess started with small things. She trawled the store's employee schedule, checked the security system's maintenance logs, and knocked on the apartment above the shop where a teenager worked nights. Each small door she opened produced a smudge of detail. A delivery man who'd seen a woman in a navy coat that afternoon, a clerk who remembered a woman with a voice like a dry leaf, a receipt from a coffee shop across the street time-stamped just before the alleged theft. Tess's notebook filled with clues that smelled like smoke before the fire. As Tess dug, a picture formed that fit the way Evelyn had always been. She'd timed it. The necklace was not stolen in the careless grab the store replayed. It had been placed. A police officer friend hinted at a pattern of seniors using petty false accusations to manipulate family members for leverage in wills and property disputes. My stomach clenched. Could Evelyn have been thinking about inheritance, about control over my house, about how moving Helena into trouble would make me bend? Marta warned me not to rush to accusations. "We need undeniable proof," she said. "A witness who will testify she saw Evelyn with the necklace, or footage showing her near the bag, or a receipt proving she bought the tag and then brought it back." The list of what we needed felt impossible until Tess texted a photo I never expected. An image of a woman in a navy coat by the jewelry display, time-stamped on a private security feed someone had managed to pull. That photo stripped away any doubt. It wasn't crystal clear, but the stance, the haircut, the tilt of the head. My stomach knew Evelyn's posture better than my own. Tess had found a small camera in the alley behind the store, a neighbor's ring cam, that had been inadvertently recording the display window. The file showed a woman linger with a deliberate slowness, reach into her tote, and move like someone placing a thing rather than taking it. Marta took one look and said we had evidence worth subpoenaing. My hands shook when I called Helena with the news. "They have a picture, Mom," she whispered. "Do you think it's really her?" I wanted to scream. "It's your grandmother." But instead I said, "Yes. We're going to make it matter." She cried with relief then, a small sob that sounded like a bell tolling the end of the worst night. "We planned a public move because secrets live in silence." Marta suggested filing a complaint with the district attorney's office alongside a civil suit for malicious prosecution, naming Evelyn as a suspect in planting evidence and coercing witnesses. Marta emphasized that this would not be easy. Evelyn was known in church circles and had friends in the Rotary Club who might try to shield her. "But once we file, the DA has to look," Marta said. "Public pressure helps too." So I began to tell a few chosen people I trusted who could not be bought with Evelyn's pie or smile. Jonah, who still remembered how she'd manipulated our father's funeral arrangements years ago. Tess, who had no patience for matriarchal cruelty. And 2 mothers from Helena's volunteer group who loved the girl's steady kindness. They listened and shared, and their indignation burned like kindling. Even as we prepared the legal barrage, A darker part of me wanted more than court justice. I wanted Evelyn to feel the loneliness she had cultivated. I wanted her to understand what it was to be gaslit by someone you love. Marta cautioned against vindictiveness, reminding me the law is not a stage for revenge. You will be tempted to orchestrate a spectacle, she said gently. Don't. Let the truth stand on its own. Her words cooled the heat in my palms. I nodded because I trusted her judgment, but the thought of simply letting the DA's office handle it felt like putting a bandage on a wound that needed cauterizing. The patient in me wanted healing. The mother in me wanted vindication. I promised myself I would let the law do its work and use my other energies to make sure the truth reached every corner of our small town. On the evening before we filed, Tess brought one more surprise. She'd found a receipt showing Evelyn had been at the mall earlier that day, buying coffee and, curiously, a small jewelry polishing cloth from an artisan stall. The receipt had Evelyn's signature for a loyalty card and the exact time that aligned with the ring cam footage. When I stared at her handwriting, it looked like a map of all the ways she'd guided and misled me my whole life. I printed copies, stacked them on Marta's desk, and felt a small, fierce vindication. The next morning, with Helen's temporary release hearing queued and a handful of community members whispering in our favor, I walked into the courthouse with my daughter at my side and a plan in my pocket. I had traded my fear for a strange kind of courage. We stood in the hall outside the courtroom while Marta moved through the paperwork like a conductor. The building smelled of decades of stories. Confessions, pleadings, promises. I clutched Helena's hand and felt the rhythm of her pulse. "We're doing this," I whispered. She squeezed back, and for a moment she was my little girl again. Not the one in cuffs but the one who crawled into my bed during storms. The doors opened, and I walked in with a steady step. As we took our seats and the judge called the docket, I noticed Evelyn in the gallery. She sat like a statue, all polished calm, and her eyes met mine coldly. For a breath, the room blurred. Then Marta stood, evidence in hand, and began to speak. What she said next would either expose Evelyn completely or leave us vulnerable. I leaned forward, knowing that whatever happened in the next moments would change us forever. The courtroom became a theater of silence when Marta presented the evidence. She laid the photographs on the judge's bench as though she were stacking cards for a final game. The grainy ring cam stills of a woman in a navy coat placing something into her tote were projected onto the screen, and the murmurs began instantly. I watched Evelyn's jaw tighten, her lips pressing into that thin line I'd seen my whole life whenever she was cornered. Marta's voice was calm, steady, but her words carried an edge like polished steel. "This is not theft. This is entrapment. The minor in this case was deliberately set up, and here is proof that the grandmother of this child, Mrs. Evelyn Whitfield, was at the scene, handling merchandise that later appeared in the bag." The judge's eyes narrowed, the gallery gasped, and I felt my heart slam against my ribs. Helena sat beside me trembling, and I tried to squeeze her hand quietly under the table. The prosecutor objected, of course, trying to dismiss the footage as inconclusive, arguing that the angle was unclear, but Marta had anticipated that. She held up the receipt Tess had discovered, Evelyn's handwriting scrawled across it, the timestamp aligning precisely with the footage. "Coincidence does not write itself twice," Marta said with a finality that landed in the air like a hammer. Evelyn's lawyer, a nervous man with thinning hair, shuffled papers and avoided her gaze. It wasn't just evidence. It was a mirror, and everyone in that courtroom could see the reflection. Evelyn looked smaller than I had ever seen her, her posture sagging, though her eyes still radiated venom when they met mine. The judge granted Helena's immediate release, and the case against her was officially dropped. I felt a wave of relief crash over me so hard I could hardly breathe, and Helena collapsed against my shoulder, sobbing quietly into my coat. But victory was not the end. It was only the opening act. Evelyn hadn't been arrested yet, and though Marta's complaint with the DA was in motion, it would take weeks, maybe months, to press formal charges. The law was deliberate, patient, maddeningly slow. But revenge, that was something I could taste now, sharp and dangerous. I knew I needed to be careful, but I also knew I could not simply let my mother retreat into the shadows again, free to rewrite the narrative. The community needed to see her truth. I began with the truth of my own story. I called the local newspaper and offered to speak on the record. The journalist, a young woman named Carla, came to my kitchen table with a recorder and a notebook. Her eyes wide as I unfolded decades of manipulation, gaslighting and cruelty. I told her about the scholarship Evelyn made me abandon, the lies she spread to my friends when I tried to leave home, the way she turned every family dinner into a battlefield. When I explained the necklace incident, Carla's face shifted from shock to fury. "People need to read this," she said. "Not because it's gossip, but because it's survival. Families deserve to know what hidden abuse looks like." The article was published a week later, and suddenly, Evelyn's reputation as a charitable matriarch cracked like porcelain. The backlash in town was immediate. Neighbors who once fawned over her baked pies and tidy garden now whispered behind her back at church. Old friends of mine, long silent, came forward with their own stories. Small cruelties Evelyn had inflicted on them, manipulations she had wielded like weapons. One woman told me Evelyn had convinced her husband to fire her from a job years ago by spreading rumors about theft. Another said Evelyn had once tried to sabotage her daughter's engagement. The pattern was undeniable, and the town began to see her not as the saintly grandmother she pretended to be, but as the puppeteer she truly was. Still, Evelyn did not crumble. She kept her head high, kept attending Sunday service, even smiled that same cold smile. I knew she was plotting, and she struck back with letters. Handwritten, venomous letters sent to neighbors, family, even Helena's school principal. She painted me as an ungrateful daughter, a liar trying to smear her out of jealousy, accusing me of manipulating my child into hating her grandmother. When Helena found one stuffed into her locker, she broke down in tears. "Why won't she stop?" she asked, her voice thin with exhaustion. I held her and whispered, "Because stopping would mean admitting what she did. And she can't." But the truth was, Evelyn's smear campaign worked on some people. A handful of churchgoers rallied behind her, defending her character, dismissing the evidence as a misunderstanding. It infuriated me that even with proof, some would still choose to believe the performance over the reality. That was the moment I decided the law alone wasn't enough. Evelyn needed to be stripped of her mask completely. Tess suggested a confrontation, but not a private one. "She thrives in the dark," Tess said. "Bring her into the light and she'll burn." So I arranged a family gathering, under the guise of talking things out. Jonah, Helena, a few cousins, and even Evelyn herself. I invited them to my house, set the table like it was Thanksgiving, and kept the camera hidden on the mantel. When everyone was seated, I pulled out the evidence, the footage, the receipts, the letters she had written, and placed them in front of her. Evelyn sat frozen, her fork clattering against the plate. "This is who you are," I said. "And the world will know it." For the first time, I saw panic flash in her eyes. She tried to lash back, accusing me of fabricating everything, but Jonah slammed his hand on the table. "Enough, Mom," he said. His voice cracked with decades of pent-up rage. "You've destroyed enough of us." The confrontation tore through the family like wildfire. Some stormed out in disbelief. Others stayed and demanded Evelyn confess, but she never did. Instead, she left my house that night with her chin high and her coat pulled tight, as though bracing against a storm only she could see. The video I recorded spread quickly among relatives, then leaked beyond the family circle. Evelyn's image of perfection dissolved day by day. Her alliances shrinking, her power bleeding away. And yet I could not shake the unease. People like her rarely go down quietly. Revenge may have started with me, but Evelyn had survived decades on her ability to twist. The question that haunted me now was simple and terrifying. How far would she go to reclaim her throne? I learned the answer one evening when I came home to find a police cruiser parked outside my house. An officer handed me a complaint filed by Evelyn, alleging that I was harassing her, that I had orchestrated the entire jewelry store incident, that I was unstable and dangerous. My hands shook as I read the lies, each word a dagger aimed at undoing everything I'd fought for. Helena clung to me, whispering, "What if they believe her again?" But I knew something Evelyn didn't. I had already built a fortress of proof, alliances, and truth too strong for her lies to shatter. Still, the war was far from over. As I closed the door that night, my heart pounded with both dread and determination. The next chapter of this battle would decide everything. My daughter's future, my family's legacy, and whether Evelyn would finally face the downfall she had evaded her whole life. The first hearing for Evelyn's counter-complaint felt like walking into a trap designed to swallow me whole. She arrived in her pressed navy suit, her silver hair perfectly pinned, playing the role of the wounded elder. People whispered as she limped slightly, a performance I knew was exaggerated to gain sympathy. I sat across the aisle, my palms sweating, clutching the binder of evidence Marta had prepared. The judge, stern but fair, asked Evelyn to speak first, and she poured out her words like poison wrapped in honey. "My daughter has turned against me, Your Honor. She manipulates my granddaughter, isolates me from my family, and spreads lies to ruin my name. I am afraid in my own home." The room hummed with disbelief, some nodding, others narrowing their eyes. For a moment, I feared her act might work yet again, twisting reality like she always had. But Marta rose with the calm confidence of a surgeon about to make the first cut. She laid out the sequence of events, beginning with the jewelry store footage, then the receipts, then the letters Evelyn had written. "This is not harassment," Marta said, her voice sharp enough to slice. "This is accountability." The screen flickered as the surveillance clip played again, and Evelyn's mask cracked for just a second. Her lips tightening, her eyes darting to the jury box as if searching for an ally. None came. Still, she didn't falter. She leaned into her frail act, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "That is not me," she whispered. The audacity of it made bile rise in my throat. Helena squeezed my hand, her small fingers a lifeline reminding me why we were here. The judge didn't issue a ruling yet, but I could tell the tide was shifting. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn grew quieter in public but more venomous in private. She began leaving voicemails at odd hours, long rants where she called me ungrateful, accused me of turning the world against her, then sometimes begged for forgiveness in the same breath. I saved every message. Each one was another brick in the case we were building, another glimpse into the cracks spreading beneath her polished surface. Helena refused to take her calls at all, and though I knew it hurt her to cut off her grandmother, I also knew it was necessary. Tess reminded me daily, "She's unraveling. Don't give her the thread." But I couldn't shake the unease. People like Evelyn didn't simply unravel. They tried to drag others into the tangle with them. My fears proved right when the school called. Helena had been cornered by two girls in the hallway, both parroting Evelyn's lies, that she was a thief, that her mom was a manipulator. Helena came home shaking, tears staining her cheeks, and my rage burned hotter than it had in months. Evelyn wasn't just targeting me anymore. She was using children as her weapons. I drafted an email that night, carefully worded but unflinching, to the principal and the district board, attaching all the evidence and making it clear. My daughter was being harassed as a result of Evelyn's false accusations. The district responded swiftly, holding a meeting with the families of the girls involved. Their parents were horrified, apologizing profusely, admitting they'd heard rumors from someone at church. And I knew exactly who that someone was. Evelyn's circle of influence was shrinking, but she was determined to leave scars on her way down. It was Jonah, of all people, who reached out next. His voice on the phone was softer than I remembered, weighed down by years of silence. "She's different now," he said. "Angrier. Paranoid. I don't know what to do anymore." I hesitated, the wounds between us still raw, but I also knew he was a piece of this puzzle. "You could start," I told him, "by admitting what she did to Helena. To all of us." There was a long pause before he sighed. "I can't undo the past, Clara. But maybe I can help you end this." His words carried both regret and resolve, and though I wasn't ready to trust him fully, I recognized the value of having another witness. Evelyn had thrived on silence for too long. Breaking it was the first step to dismantling her empire completely. Together, Jonah and I began gathering stories. We reached out to cousins, distant relatives, neighbors, anyone who had crossed paths with Evelyn. Slowly, a chorus of voices emerged, each one echoing the same theme: control, manipulation, betrayal. One cousin confessed Evelyn had pressured her into signing over a piece of land years ago, promising family unity, but keeping the profit for herself. A neighbor described how Evelyn had sabotaged her small business with false rumors. Piece by piece, the mythology Evelyn had built around herself as the strong, selfless matriarch collapsed. Jonah wept when he heard some of the stories, the realization of how deeply he'd been blinded hitting him like a freight train. "She destroyed more lives than I ever imagined," he admitted. "For the first time in years I felt the possibility of true justice looming. Not just for me, not just for Helena, but for everyone Evelyn had harmed." But Evelyn wasn't finished. One night, I came home to find a rock thrown through my kitchen window, glass scattered across the floor, a note tied to it with messy, frantic handwriting. "Stop or you'll regret it." My blood turned cold as Helena read over my shoulder, her face pale. I reported it immediately, and though the police couldn't prove it was Evelyn, the message was clear. She was desperate enough to get sloppy. That was when Marta decided to escalate, filing a restraining order and petitioning for Evelyn to be investigated formally for harassment and intimidation. The process was grueling, every court date draining me further, but I refused to stop. Every tear, every moment of fear only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for Helena anymore. I was fighting for freedom from decades of chains I hadn't realized were wrapped around me. As the legal battle intensified, so did the emotional one. Friends who had once avoided choosing sides began showing up at my door with casseroles, offering babysitting, lending quiet but steady support. The community, once torn between the image Evelyn projected and the truth she hid, began to tip in my favor. Articles circulated, whispers turned into open discussions, and suddenly Evelyn wasn't untouchable anymore. Yet still at night I dreamed of her face, the cold eyes, the smirk that said she was always one step ahead. I woke drenched in sweat, convinced she was plotting her next move. Revenge was sweet, yes, but it was also exhausting. I wondered sometimes if winning against her meant becoming like her. Obsessed, relentless, unable to move on. But then I'd see Helena lighter somehow, smiling more freely, and I knew why I had to keep going. The breaking point came during the final restraining order hearing. Evelyn sat across from me, her mask cracked beyond repair. Her voice trembling not from performance but from genuine rage. "You've ruined me," she spat, her words echoing across the courtroom. "You've turned everyone against me." Marta stood calmly and replied, "No, you did that yourself." The judge granted the order, barring Evelyn from contacting me or Helena in any form. It was a victory but not the end. As I walked out of that courtroom, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs, I realized the war wasn't just about Evelyn anymore. It was about reclaiming every piece of myself she had tried to break. The revenge I had served was brutal, but it was also liberating. And yet, deep down, I knew she wouldn't disappear quietly. The storm wasn't over. It was only shifting. The weeks after the restraining order felt like the calm after a violent storm, but I knew better than to mistake it for peace. Evelyn didn't vanish into the shadows. She adapted. I'd see her car parked down the block sometimes, the silhouette of her head just visible before she drove away. Helena swore she saw Evelyn's figure outside the school gates one morning, though the staff couldn't confirm it. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach daily, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My therapist told me this hypervigilance was natural after years of abuse, but I also knew Evelyn's nature. She couldn't stand being silenced. Every day she spent unable to control me or Helena chipped away at her, and a woman like her would never go quietly. Meanwhile, Helena blossomed in ways that almost brought me to tears. Freed from her grandmother's looming shadow, she began joining after-school clubs again, laughing with her friends, and even daring to dream about the future. One evening, she came into the kitchen with a stack of college brochures, her eyes bright. "Do you think I could go out of state, Mom?" she asked. My heart clenched, both with pride and fear. I didn't want Evelyn's poison to limit my daughter, but I also couldn't ignore the risks. "You can go anywhere," I told her, hugging her tightly. In that moment, I realized the fight wasn't just about revenge. It was about creating a future where Helena could live free from the suffocating grip of manipulation and lies. Jonah began stepping up too, though his involvement was complicated. He visited us cautiously at first, always unsure if Helena would accept him. She kept her distance, still wounded by his past absence, but I noticed her softening slowly. Jonah tried hard, taking her to ice cream, helping with homework, even fixing the old bike in our garage. One night, after Helena had gone to bed, he admitted to me, "I wish I had seen the truth sooner. I can't undo what she did to us, Clara, but maybe I can be the father she deserves now." His voice broke, and though my anger at him hadn't fully healed, I found myself nodding. If Evelyn's downfall gave Helena back her father, maybe some good could come from all this wreckage. Still, I warned him, "You falter once, and she'll never forgive you. Neither will I." Despite the restraining order, Evelyn found ways to haunt us indirectly. Anonymous letters began showing up in my mailbox, written in sharp, jagged handwriting that was unmistakably hers. They contained venom disguised as concern. "Helena deserves better than you. I pray she sees it before it's too late." At first, I ripped them up in rage, but Marta advised me to save every single one. "Patterns matter in cases like this," she explained. "Every letter is another thread proving she can't let go." So, I built a folder full of Evelyn's desperate attempts, each one a reminder of the lengths she would go to maintain control. Some nights, staring at that folder, I wondered if revenge was even enough. Could a restraining order or public humiliation ever balance the scales for what she had done to Helena? The turning point came when Evelyn's lies caught up with her financially. A distant cousin contacted me out of the blue, furious after learning Evelyn had manipulated her into a fraudulent loan years ago. Word was spreading quickly through the family, and Evelyn's carefully curated image as the wise matriarch was collapsing. Suddenly, those who once defended her began reaching out to me, sharing their own grievances and betrayals. One uncle admitted he'd cut ties with Evelyn decades ago after she cheated him in a business deal. A neighbor confessed Evelyn had sabotaged her friendship circle by spreading rumors. It was like watching a dam burst, each story another crack in Evelyn's facade. For years, she had ruled with fear and deception, but now people were emboldened to speak. And with every voice that joined mine, Evelyn's empire of control crumbled further into dust. Yet, Evelyn's desperation only grew darker. One afternoon, I received a call from Helena's school. A strange woman had shown up asking for Helena, claiming to be her grandmother. The staff refused to let her through, but the description left no doubt. It was Evelyn. My hands shook as I drove to the school, every worst-case scenario flashing in my mind. Helena was safe, but the incident rattled her deeply. "Why won't she leave us alone?" she whispered that night, curled against me on the couch. I had no answer, only the painful truth. Evelyn would never stop until she was forced to. That realization hardened my resolve. Revenge wasn't just personal anymore, it was survival. I promised Helena, "We'll finish this. Once and for all." Marta prepared the next move, pressing criminal charges for harassment and stalking, bolstered by the letters, voicemails, and now the school incident. She warned me it would be brutal, that Evelyn would fight tooth and nail, but I was ready. I had spent too many nights looking over my shoulder, too many mornings trying to reassure my trembling daughter. It was time to end this cycle before Evelyn dragged us into her madness forever. Jonah agreed to testify, as did several family members and neighbors who had grown tired of Evelyn's schemes. The case wasn't just mine anymore, it was everyone's. And that collective strength gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. We were finally turning Evelyn's tactics back on her, stripping her of the isolation she thrived on. The trial was set for late spring, and as the date approached, My anxiety warred with anticipation. I dreamed of standing in that courtroom, looking Evelyn in the eyes, and watching her empire crumble once and for all. But I also dreaded the venom she would spit, the lies she would craft, the sympathy she would try to wring from strangers. Marta assured me we had the evidence to win, but trials were never predictable. "Remember, Clara," she said gently one night, "this isn't just about punishment. It's about liberation, for you, for Helena, for everyone she's hurt." Her words echoed in my heart. Liberation. That was the goal. And though revenge tasted sweet, freedom was what I craved most. Still, as I tucked Helena into bed the night before the trial, her small hand clutching mine, I couldn't shake the fear. Evelyn wouldn't go down without drawing blood. On the morning of the trial, I stood in front of the courthouse, the weight of decades pressing on my shoulders. Evelyn emerged from a sleek black car, dressed immaculately as always, but her eyes betrayed her. Wild, cornered, desperate. For the first time, I saw her not as a towering figure of control, but as a fragile woman clinging to the last threads of power. Helena stood beside me, taller now, stronger than I ever imagined, and I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was hers too. Together we walked into the courthouse, ready to face the storm one final time. My heart pounded, my throat dry, but my mind was clear. Revenge had carried me this far, but today, justice would finish the work. And as the doors closed behind us, I knew our lives would never be the same again. I woke up the next morning with swollen eyes, my pillow damp from tears that had escaped while I slept. My first thought was of my daughter, Clara, and the way her voice cracked when she asked me why Grandma hated her. Those words carved into me like a knife. I sat up in bed, the light of dawn barely seeping through the curtains, and made myself a promise. No one, not even my own mother, would break my child again. I walked into the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and stared out the window at the street that looked so normal, while my world felt anything but. In that quiet, I decided I wasn't just going to stand back. If my mother thought she could destroy Clara, she had underestimated both of us. Revenge wasn't just an option. It had become my mission. I spent the next few hours writing everything down. Dates, events, the necklace, the arrest, every poisonous word my mother had spat about Clara. The paper trembled beneath my pen as I realized the depth of the betrayal. This wasn't an act of desperation or senility. It was calculated cruelty. I thought back to my childhood, to the way she used to manipulate people, twisting truth and lies together until no one knew which way was up. She'd always wanted control, and now she was trying to control me through Clara. But this time I had something she didn't expect, the will to fight back and protect the only person who mattered more than anything else in the world. As I looked over my notes, I realized that exposing my mother would be messy and painful, but the thought of letting her get away with this made my blood boil. I started making phone calls, first to the officer who had been kind to Clara that night. I asked him questions, framed them carefully, making it clear I wasn't accusing, just trying to understand. He told me something that made my stomach drop. The necklace had been placed exactly where someone would find it quickly. It wasn't hidden deep in Clara's bag. It was practically sitting on top like bait. I thanked him, hung up, and clutched the phone to my chest. It was the proof I needed to confirm what I already knew in my gut. My mother had staged this. The next call I made was to my friend Eleanor, who had been by my side through the messiest parts of my divorce years ago. If anyone understood how vindictive people could be, it was her. I told her everything, my voice breaking as I recounted the humiliation Clara endured. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, then said, "She wants you broken, Maisie. But she picked the wrong person this time." Hearing those words lit something in me. Eleanor reminded me that revenge wasn't just about payback. It was about reclaiming power. I could already see the outlines of a plan forming in my mind, one that would make my mother face herself in a way she never had before. That afternoon, Clara came home from school, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. The kids had whispered about her in the hallways, and she felt the weight of their judgment. I hugged her tightly, whispering, "This isn't your shame to carry, it's hers." But my daughter was too young to understand the complexity of betrayal. All she knew was that someone she trusted had tried to ruin her life. I tucked her hair behind her ear and promised her something I intended to keep. "She won't get away with this, Clara. Not ever." In her tearful eyes, I saw both fear and hope. That mixture was enough to fuel me further. I wasn't just planning revenge anymore. I was planning justice. The plan began with gathering witnesses. I remembered the small gasps from family members when the necklace appeared, the side glances that suggested doubt. Surely someone suspected the truth. I reached out to my cousin Lydia, who had always been more of an observer than a participant in family drama. When I asked her about that night, her voice dropped low. "Maisie, I saw Mom slip something into Clara's bag, but I didn't want to believe it. I thought I imagined it." Her admission left me shaking, both in anger and in relief. Finally, someone else had seen it. That single piece of confirmation was enough to push my plan into motion. My mother wasn't just cruel, she was exposed whether she realized it or not. I knew, however, that confronting her directly would lead nowhere. My mother thrived on denial and gaslighting. She would twist words until truth felt like fiction. No, the confrontation had to be bigger, public, undeniable. I started piecing it together like a puzzle, each detail carefully placed. It would happen in a setting she couldn't control, where her audience would be the same family she sought approval from. For once, she would not be the puppet master. I felt almost giddy at the thought of her face when her mask cracked, when her poison spilled out for everyone to see. But beneath that anticipation was a steady ache. I wished it didn't have to come to this, that my own mother hadn't forced me into battle. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of my father. He had passed years ago, but he'd always been the buffer between my mother's sharp edges and me. I wondered what he would think now, if he'd be horrified at the woman she had become, or if he had seen glimpses of this cruelty long before I did. I whispered into the dark, "Dad, I'm sorry. I have to do this." The silence gave me no answers, but I felt a strange sense of permission, as if somewhere he understood. I closed my eyes and saw Clara's tear-streaked face, and that vision hardened my resolve. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was survival for both of us. The next morning, I crafted invitations under the guise of a family gathering. A dinner to heal wounds after the incident, I wrote. I played the role of peacemaker, the dutiful daughter who wanted to mend fences. My mother, of course, accepted eagerly, probably believing she had one, that I had folded under her dominance once again. If only she knew what was coming. As I mailed those invitations, I felt the sharp thrill of secrecy, like I was carrying a weapon hidden beneath my skin. My hands shook, but not from fear, from anticipation. Soon the stage would be set, and the truth would no longer be something whispered in corners. It would be shouted, undeniable, in front of everyone. That evening, Clara sat beside me at the table, working on her homework while I sipped tea and watched her. She looked up and asked softly, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I smiled through the ache in my chest and told her the truth. "We're not just going to be okay, Clara. We're going to show everyone who we are. Strong. Untouchable." She didn't understand the full weight of my words, but she smiled faintly and went back to her work. I reached out and touched her hand, feeling the smallness of it, the fragility. She was still just a child, yet she had already borne scars no teenager should carry. I promised myself once again that I would carry the weight for her. All of it. As I cleaned up that night, I thought about the line between justice and revenge. Was I crossing it? Did it matter? My mother had taken something sacred, trust, and shattered it. If she could betray her own granddaughter, she was capable of anything. My mind wandered to dark possibilities. What if she tried again? What if Clara was never safe as long as my mother had any hold over us? The thought chilled me to the bone, but it also reassured me that I was doing the right thing. Exposing her wasn't cruelty, it was protection. And if my revenge carried a sting she couldn't forget, then maybe it would finally be enough to end her reign of destruction once and for all. On the day of the gathering, I stood in front of the mirror, my dress ironed and neat, my hair pinned back. I looked calm, almost serene, but inside me a storm raged. I imagined my mother's smug smile when she walked in, the way she'd probably pat Clara on the head like nothing had ever happened. I felt my jaw tighten. Tonight would be the night that smile faltered. Tonight, my mother would face her own cruelty, and she would face it in the very place she valued most, in the eyes of her family. I turned away from the mirror, picked up my notes, and slipped them into my purse. The trap was set. And soon she would walk straight into it. The night of the gathering arrived like a storm I had been waiting to unleash. The house was glowing with warm lights, candles flickering on the dining table, and the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. From the outside, it looked like any other family dinner, a place of comfort and laughter, but underneath it was a battlefield waiting to erupt. I set the table with care, placing every fork and glass with precision, my hands steady though my heart pounded. I wanted everything to look perfect, flawless, because my mother thrived on appearances. Tonight, appearances would betray her. Clara sat quietly in the corner, her eyes darting nervously as if she could sense the storm coming. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Trust me, baby. Tonight, everything changes." She nodded, but I could still see the worry in her gaze. Guests began to arrive slowly, one by one, coats draped over their arms, cheeks rosy from the cold night air. My cousin Lydia was among the first, and when our eyes met, she gave me a look that said she knew exactly what was about to unfold. She brushed past me, whispering, "I'll back you up if you need me." Her words steadied me. Soon, laughter filled the room as more family trickled in. The clinking of glasses, the sound of small talk, and the faint buzz of a football game playing in the living room, all of it painted a false picture of unity. But under that veneer, tension simmered. And then, like a shadow across the light, my mother entered. Her posture was stiff yet commanding, her silver hair pinned perfectly, her eyes sharp as knives. She smiled that familiar smile that had fooled so many for so long. But not tonight. "Maisie, darling," she said, her voice dripping with mock affection. "What a wonderful idea, bringing the family together again after everything." Her eyes flickered toward Clara, and I felt my daughter shrink into herself. I clenched my fists beneath the tablecloth, forcing myself to smile in return. "Yes, mother," I said sweetly. "It's time we cleared the air." She smirked, clearly believing she had already won, that her place as the matriarch was unshakable. I guided everyone to their seats, my pulse quickening. Every word she spoke, every glance she cast at Clara, was fuel for the fire burning inside me. The more she performed her charade, the more determined I became. Tonight wasn't about yelling or accusations. Tonight was about truth laid bare, so raw it couldn't be ignored. Dinner began with polite conversation. My mother told exaggerated stories about her charity work, how everyone in town admired her generosity. She laughed in that hollow way she always had, expecting the room to mirror her amusement. Some did out of habit, but I noticed others exchanging uneasy looks. Perhaps they too had begun to see through her cracks. Clara sat silently, pushing her food around her plate. My mother noticed and leaned forward with a cutting remark disguised as concern. "Darling, you hardly have an appetite. Still shaken, are we? Such a shame, but these things happen when children don't understand right from wrong." The words sliced through me like glass. I looked around the table and saw the discomfort in their eyes. That was my cue. I set down my fork, wiped my mouth calmly with a napkin and said, "Actually, Mother, I think it's time we talked about what really happened." The room went silent, forks clinking softly against plates as people froze mid-bite. My mother's smile stiffened, but she recovered quickly, tilting her head. "What do you mean, Maisie?" she asked with feigned innocence. My throat tightened, but I pressed forward. "The necklace. The arrest. The shame Clara endured. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad luck. You put that necklace in her bag." Gasps rippled across the table, and I saw my cousin Lydia's hand fly to her mouth. My mother's face darkened for just a second before she let out a brittle laugh. "Maisie, how could you say such a thing? That's absurd." Her tone was laced with venom, but I had been ready for it. It's not absurd. Lydia saw you. And the officer who searched Clara's bag told me it was placed where it could be found immediately. That's not how a thief hides something. That's how someone sets a trap. The silence deepened, thick and suffocating. My mother's jaw tightened, but her eyes darted around the table, searching for allies. Some avoided her gaze, others looked at me, their expressions torn between disbelief and dawning realization. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling with rage. You would turn my family against me with lies. After everything I've done for you. I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady, carrying years of pent-up fury. No, Mother. You turned this family against itself when you decided to destroy your own granddaughter. You've manipulated and controlled for years, but this time you went too far. This time you tried to shatter a child's life. Clara's hand slipped into mine under the table, her small fingers trembling. I squeezed them tightly, giving her strength. The truth was out, and it couldn't be stuffed back into the shadows where my mother liked to keep her sins. For the first time in my life, I saw her mask slip. Her face twisted, not into sorrow or regret, but pure contempt. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed, her voice low but seething. Do you think you can embarrass me in front of my family? Do you think anyone will believe your pathetic story over mine? But she underestimated me. They already do, I replied, gesturing toward Lydia. My cousin raised her chin and spoke firmly, her voice carrying across the room. I saw you, Aunt. I didn't want to believe it, but I saw you slip something into Clara's bag. The shock that rippled across the table was undeniable now. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass, her control slipping like sand through her fingers. She tried to steady her voice, but the cracks were showing, and for once, the power wasn't hers. The room erupted into whispers, cousins and aunts and uncles murmuring among themselves. My mother tried to cut through the noise. This is slander, she barked. You're all blind, letting Maisie spin her lies. But the tide had already turned. I looked her dead in the eye and said softly but firmly, You tried to destroy Clara because you hate that she reminds you of the parts of me you couldn't break. But you failed. You failed because she has me, and I'll never let her stand alone against you. The words hung in the air like a verdict. My mother's lips parted, as if to spit another venomous denial, but no one leaned in to listen this time. No one rushed to her defense. For once in her life she was isolated, exposed. And I knew then that this was only the beginning of her unraveling. The air in the dining room grew heavy, thick with tension as the truth settled like a stone in water. My mother sat rigid, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. For once, she had no clever retort, no performance to charm the room into her corner. Her silence was deafening. Family members exchanged nervous glances, some whispering to each other, others staring at their plates. Clara leaned into me, her small body trembling, but I could feel her relief radiating through the fear. She finally had proof she wasn't crazy or guilty. My heart swelled with pride and sorrow at the same time. My mother's entire life had been a game of masks, and tonight I had ripped hers off in front of the people she valued most. But as much as victory tasted sweet, I knew her fight was far from over. Finally my Uncle Gerald cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Eleanor, he said, his voice stern, is this true? His question cut through the room like a blade. My mother scoffed, raising her chin defiantly. Of course not. Do you really think I'd sabotage my own granddaughter? This is ridiculous. Her voice wavered though, and everyone heard it. Lydia didn't hesitate. I saw it with my own eyes, she repeated firmly. You can deny all you want, but you can't change what I witnessed. My mother's glare snapped toward her, sharp enough to wound, but Lydia didn't flinch. Her courage bolstered me. It was as if years of whispered doubts and quiet observations from others had finally burst into the open. I could see it in their faces. The cracks in their loyalty toward her were widening, and no amount of denial could seal them back together. Clara squeezed my hand under the table, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, can we leave?" Her fear stabbed at my heart, but I shook my head gently. "Not yet, sweetheart. She needs to hear this." My mother's eyes flicked toward Clara with a look so cold it chilled me. "Don't you dare play the victim," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed this family." Gasps erupted, and I saw the disgust grow in the eyes of my relatives. For once, they weren't just shocked, they were angry with her. Gerald slammed his hand against the table, making the silverware jump. "Enough," he shouted. "You don't get to torment a child and call it discipline." His voice boomed through the room, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker across my mother's face. The tide had officially turned, and she could feel it. I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You always taught me that family means protecting each other, but you've done nothing but tear us down. You tried to ruin my daughter's life just to keep your grip on control. Do you realize what that does to a 15-year-old girl?" My words hung heavy in the air. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't just from pain, they were from the validation of finally being defended. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "You always said you wanted to be remembered as the strong one, the one who held this family together. But what will people remember now? A grandmother who betrayed her own blood." Her lips trembled, and for the first time in my life, I saw the woman behind the armor. Afraid, cornered, exposed. The room erupted again, voices overlapping as relatives argued among themselves. Some demanded answers, others shook their heads in disbelief. My cousin Timothy, who had always worshipped my mother, finally spoke. "Aunt Eleanor, if this is true, I don't think I can look at you the same way again." His voice cracked, but his words struck like lightning. My mother's hand shook as she lifted her wine glass, trying to regain composure, but her mask was gone. She looked smaller now, weaker, like the power she had held for decades had slipped through her fingers. I felt a strange mix of triumph and grief. Exposing her came with a cost, a wound that cut through the entire family. But as I looked at Clara, her head resting against my arm, I knew it was worth it. She needed to see that monsters don't always win, even when they wear familiar faces. My mother slammed her glass down, shattering it across the table. Wine splashed onto the white tablecloth, seeping into it like blood. "You ungrateful wretches," she screamed. "After everything I've given you, after everything I've sacrificed, this is how you repay me. With betrayal." Her face was twisted with rage, and for a moment, I thought she might lunge across the table at me. But instead, she rose to her feet, towering above us, trembling with fury. The room fell silent again, all eyes locked on her. "You'll regret this, Maisie," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "You think you've won, but you don't know me as well as you think. I will never be humiliated like this." Her words should have frightened me, but instead I felt a calm settle over me. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of her threats. She had already lost. I stood too, meeting her eye, refusing to cower. "The only thing I regret," I said softly but firmly, "is letting you hold power over me for so long. But that ends tonight." The words left my lips like a final verdict. The family's eyes shifted between us, sensing the battle was no longer just words. It was a war for the soul of our family. My mother's breathing grew heavy, her chest rising and falling as she tried to summon the strength to retort. But the room wasn't with her anymore. The weight of truth had shifted everything. She looked around, desperate for someone to defend her, but all she found were faces turned away, lips pressed tight in judgment. Her empire of fear had crumbled in a single night, and all she could do was watch as it slipped away, piece by piece, in the eyes of those she had ruled. Clara tugged my sleeve gently, whispering, "Mom, can we go home now?" Her voice pulled me back from the tension, reminding me of what truly mattered. I looked at her sweet, tear-streaked face and knew the battle was already won. I turned to the family and said, "We're leaving. But remember this. Silence lets cruelty grow. Don't stay quiet when you see it again." With that, I guided Clara to her feet, my arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. My mother stood frozen, her hands shaking, her face pale. She wanted to scream, to claw back her control, but there was nothing left to grab. The family parted silently as we walked to the door. Every step I took was both heavy and liberating, as though chains were falling from me. When I reached the door, I glanced back one final time, seeing her collapse into her chair, her empire in ruins. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the car filling the silence. Clara leaned against the window, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you." Tears burned in my eyes, but I held them back, reaching for her hand. "You never have to thank me for protecting you," I said softly. The streetlights passed in a blur, casting long shadows across her face. She was safe, she was believed, and that mattered more than anything else. But deep inside, I knew my mother wasn't done. She was wounded, cornered, and that made her dangerous. Revenge wasn't finished. It had only just begun. My daughter needed me strong, and I had no intention of letting Eleanor rise from the ashes. As the rain began to fall lightly against the windshield, I tightened my grip on the wheel. The war wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The weeks dragged on after the courtroom ordeal, leaving wounds in our family that no sentence could heal. My daughter was withdrawn, her laughter dimmed, her innocence stolen by my mother's cruel betrayal. I tried everything, therapy sessions, long walks, and endless late-night talks, to restore her light, but every glance at her hollow eyes reminded me of the devastation caused. My mother had succeeded in tarnishing something far greater than a reputation. She had robbed my daughter of trust. My anger didn't fade. It fermented, bubbling inside me until it became an obsession with justice, vengeance, and reclamation. Every time I replayed the incident in my mind, I saw not just the necklace but the smug expression on my mother's face, as if she relished watching my daughter crumble. I couldn't allow that smile to go unpunished. I began sketching out ways to strike back, not with petty revenge, but with annihilation. I started with her circle of influence. My mother prided herself on being the matriarch of respectability in her community, a woman whose word carried weight at church gatherings, charity events, and bridge clubs. It was this carefully crafted facade that gave her power, but also her greatest vulnerability. I began to quietly dismantle it. Whispers slipped from my lips into eager ears, factual accounts of her betrayal, each detail laced with the venom of truth. Her allies recoiled in shock, and soon her reputation, once pristine, was rotting. Invitations dried up, voices hushed when she entered rooms, and her dominance began to erode. She noticed the change quickly, accusing me of poisoning her standing, but I remained outwardly innocent. Watching her unravel in the very society she worshipped was a sweet prelude to the deeper vengeance I had planned. But I knew this wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the same suffocating humiliation she forced upon my daughter. I plotted something darker. My mother loved control, and she guarded secrets like a dragon hoarding gold. I knew her weaknesses lay in her past, skeletons buried under layers of charm and manipulation. So I dug, retracing her life, reaching out to old acquaintances, ex-friends, even estranged family members. What I uncovered was enough to scorch her carefully constructed identity. Affairs during her marriage, money siphoned from charities, lies about her own childhood designed to win sympathy. With this arsenal, I crafted a dossier of sins so damning that if released, it would destroy her entirely. I fantasized about the perfect unveiling, projecting her hypocrisy to the very community she cherished. But even that didn't feel sufficient. I wanted the punishment to be personal, intimate, inescapable. I wanted her to feel fear every day, the way my daughter had felt in that interrogation room, stripped of safety and dignity. So I turned my attention to her home, her sanctuary. At night, I crept closer, never revealing myself but leaving subtle reminders of my presence. A family photo shattered in the driveway. A note scrawled in crimson ink left on her porch. "Justice is coming." The lights flickered, the locks mysteriously loosened, and sometimes the phone rang with silence on the other end. Each act was calculated, designed to gnaw at her mind. I wanted her to glance over her shoulder constantly, to question every creak of the floorboards, to lose sleep to paranoia. Soon, her once immaculate house became a prison. She double-checked locks, drew curtains tight, and walked with a nervous twitch. My revenge was no longer about balance. It was about domination. I wasn't satisfied with her downfall in society. I wanted her spirit broken, her mind haunted. And as I watched her unravel piece by piece, I knew the storm was only beginning. But vengeance, once fed, grows hungrier. I couldn't stop at psychological torment. My mother needed to understand what it meant to have everything stripped away, just as she had stripped my daughter's security. I went after her finances next. Her accounts, once flourishing, began to bleed mysteriously. I had studied her patterns, her weaknesses with technology, her blind trust in certain advisors. A few subtle manipulations and her savings dwindled. Bills stacked high, foreclosure notices arrived, and her polished lifestyle began to crack. She raged, accusing banks, advisors, even me, but she could prove nothing. The woman who once flaunted her stability was now gasping for financial breath. Watching her sell jewelry, including the precious heirlooms she once lorded over us, filled me with a dark satisfaction. Still, even as her empire collapsed, a whisper inside me reminded me that my true victory would only come when she begged for forgiveness, not for herself, but for what she had done to my daughter. The turning point came when she finally confronted me, desperate and trembling, in a voice stripped of its former arrogance. She demanded to know if I was behind her unraveling, if I had orchestrated her fall. I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time, she saw me not as her child but as her reckoning. I didn't confirm or deny. I simply told her that every pain she felt was but a fraction of what my daughter endured. Her silence afterward was deafening. Her face etched with the realization that her sins had returned to devour her. Yet I still withheld mercy. I wanted her to stew in that despair longer, to understand that forgiveness was a privilege she would never again be granted. My revenge wasn't about reconciliation. It was about permanent scars. And as I left her standing there, a hollow shell of the woman she once was, I finally felt the stirrings of triumph. But in that triumph lurked a chilling thought. Had I become the very monster I sought to destroy? The question lingered, unanswered, as the shadows of vengeance tightened their grip around me. I woke up to police lights bleeding under my curtains and a silence so loud it felt physical. The house that once hummed with ordinary life now vibrated with consequences. The neighbor had called after a package with threatening notes, and a smashed window prompted a welfare check. Someone had reported irregular banking activity tied back to me. I had thought anonymity would protect me. Carefully placed calls, quiet transfers, ghost accounts, but in a small town secrets have a way of tripping over themselves. Officers asked questions with polite, clipped voices that made everything feel official and irreversible. I answered truths and half-truths, watched paperwork multiply like a plague, and felt something else grow inside me. The slow, cold recognition that my hands were not clean. The same resolve that had sharpened me into a protector now sat heavy and dull, chipped by the realization that my tactics had bled past retribution into culpability. The press found out faster than I expected. A neighbor's angry social post, then a local reporter sleuthing, then a headline that tried to be moral and sensational all at once. My mother's downfall became a spectacle. The very humiliation I engineered was now replayed in pixels and gossip, and it landed hard on Clara's shoulders. School friends whispered, strangers stared, and relatives took sides publicly in comment sections where cruelty felt free because a keyboard made it so. I'd wanted my mother exposed, but I didn't want my daughter marked with that stain for life. I watched Clara shrink with every share and screenshot, and with each viral paragraph my stomach knotted like a rope. The court of public opinion was a hungry animal. It didn't see nuance or motive. It only chewed and moved on to the next story, leaving wreckage behind. When the summons arrived, my chest dropped as if someone had taken out the air. Civil suits, criminal inquiries, subpoenas demanding bank records and phone logs. My private war had invited legal retaliation. The nights of sneaking felt juvenile against the weight of formal charges. My lawyer, practical and blunt, told me how the law treats vigilantism, with skepticism and often with punishment. I had to face depositions where I repeated my pain into a microphone, my grief becoming evidence. My mother, impoverished and humiliated, sat behind her attorney with a face I barely recognized. Not the scowling matriarch, but a frightened woman who'd lost everything. Seeing her that way shook the foundation of my righteous anger. The lines between villain and victim blurred into messy human shapes that refused to fit the neat categories I drafted for them. Clara's therapists tried to help her stitch small seams back together. Flashbacks came in the form of sudden sweat, nightmares, and a recoil whenever anyone raised a voice in the grocery store. I sat through sessions, learning to hear what she couldn't say. How betrayal had rewired her faith in adults. It was humbling to realize my retaliation had become a new vector of trauma, even if unintended. I had to apologize to her more than once, not with speeches but with steady habits. Being visible, predictable, and gentle in ways that felt almost alien after months of covert plotting. Those small, mundane acts of consistency, making breakfast, attending parent-teacher conferences, sitting through movie nights, became my new currency. I learned that rebuilding trust wasn't glamorous. It was repetitive and slow, a kind of quiet labor that money or fury could never replace. Family dynamics splintered further. Some relatives applauded my exposing of long-buried truths about my mother. Others recoiled, blaming my methods more than the original crime. Thanksgiving invitations disappeared. Group chats went cold. And certain family members texted only in strings of formal concern that felt like paper towels on a wound. The relatives who once phoned my mother for advice now sent me cautious messages asking if I regretted it. I did not want their pity. I wanted them to understand the rawness that drove me. But I also learned that winning a moral argument does not guarantee the restoration of relationships. In peeling back a rot at the heart of our family, I had also exposed tender places I hadn't meant to rupture. Repercussions rippled outward, and some connections, fragile as they'd been, snapped. At night, revenge visited me as dreams, distorted loops of the necklace glinting, Clara's frightened face, my mother's eyes empty and accusing. I woke with a taste of metal and the knowledge that vengeance leaves residue on everything it touches, even on your hands. I found myself replaying choices. Could I have gone to authorities first? Could I have gathered proof without sabotage? Would the community have listened if I had been patient? These questions were a kind of mental post-surgery. They hurt because they were necessary. My moral certainty had been the blade that cut through deception, but it had also severed possibilities for a gentler justice. I had to live with the knowledge that courage can become cruelty in the absence of restraint. The legal consequences matured into real, measurable penalties. Community service hours logged under the fluorescent lights of the local municipal building. A restraining order in place between my mother and me. A bone-deep irony that left both of us gasping. In court, the judge did not clap for emotional reasoning. She read statutes and handed down sentences that felt neither cruel nor merciful, just calibrated. The community watched. Some felt vindicated that the law had intervened, others whispered that the punishment was unfair. I took my sentence with a stoicism I hadn't known I possessed. Serving time doing paperwork and organizing food drives was a humbling counterpoint to the intoxication of plotting. It taught me practical things. How to file forms, how to listen without interrupting, how to give back even when the world had been taken apart by your own hands. Slowly, I learned to accept a different kind of victory. One not centered on my mother's ruin but on Clara's recovery and on making amends where it mattered. I volunteered in youth programs, I sat on panels about family abuse, and I spoke to small groups about the ripple effects of unchecked cruelty. Each time I used my voice publicly, there was the risk of judgment, but there was also the possibility of turning my story into a caution and a comfort for others. People approached me with their own quiet horrors, and in those exchanges I found purpose. Redemption, I realized, was less about dramatic payback and more about work that rebuilds what was broken. If my actions had started a fire, this was where I learned to carry water. And yet the cost remained. My mother and I had a final conversation across a mediator's table, words measured, apologies offered and parsed like currency. She would never fully acknowledge the cruelty she orchestrated, not in a way that felt complete, but she admitted to acts she could not deny. I admitted mine. We left the table with a brittle truce. No warm hugs, no sweeping reconciliations, just a map to live parallel lives with occasional monitored contact. That was all we could manage. The empathy I'd once hoped for was partial and slow. I held on to the small mercy that my daughter no longer flinched when her grandmother sent a message. Her world had shifted back toward safety, even if the architecture of our family remained altered forever. If there is a final thing I learned, it is that revenge changes the revenger more than the target. My heart had hardened in order to protect, and it stayed hardened long after the danger passed. It took time, years of therapy, of small acts of kindness, of rebuilding trust, to soften into someone who could hold both anger and compassion at once. I started teaching Clara that strength can look different. It can be gentle, it can be steady, and it can be the willingness to face consequences for choices made in hurt. We became advocates together in small ways, rebuilding a life that honored our pain but refused to be defined only by it. The world did not reset. It rearranged itself around the wake of our choices, but in that rearrangement there was room for growth. If you followed this story, thank you for staying. If my tale teaches anything, let it be this. Fight for your child, protect what is precious, but measure your weapons. Choose truth over theatrics, evidence over traps, because the law of families is complicated and the damage we do travels further than we imagine. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to follow Clara's and my journey as we learn to heal and rebuild, and to help others who might be standing where we once stood.